On the ground! Now! The command exploded like a gunshot, shattering the quiet of the night. Jasmine Carter froze, her heart slamming against her ribs as the blinding glare of police flashlights pinned her in place. Around her the world seemed to slow. The screech of tires, the crunch of boots on gravel, the metallic click of handcuffs being unholstered. "I didn't do anything!" Jasmine shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. But the officers were already on her, their hands rough as they yanked her arms behind her back. "Grand theft auto, resisting arrest, and assaulting an officer," one of them snarled, his breath hot against her ear. "You're coming with us." Jasmine's mind raced. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had been walking home, her backpack heavy with textbooks, when the police cars swerved onto the sidewalk, boxing her in. Now, as they shoved her into the back of a squad car, she realized the truth. She had been framed. The ride to the station was a blur of flashing lights and muffled radio chatter. Jasmine sat stiffly, her hands cuffed in front of her, her jaw clenched. She stared out the window, her reflection staring back. A young black girl with braided hair and a face that betrayed nothing but quiet fury. "You're in over your head, kid," the officer in the passenger seat said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Better start talking." Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't need to. They thought they had her cornered, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. As the car pulled into the station, Jasmine's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. The game was just beginning. Jasmine Carter had always been different. Even as a child, she saw the world in ways others didn't. While her classmates played hopscotch on the cracked pavement of their South Side neighborhood, Jasmine sat on the steps of her family's apartment building, dismantling old radios and reassembling them into something new. By the time she was 12, she had taught herself to code, spending hours in the local library teaching herself Python and Java. Her teachers called her a prodigy. Her mother called her a miracle. But Jasmine wasn't just smart, she was driven. She had seen too much in her short life. The drugs, the violence, the way the system chewed people up and spat them out. She wanted to change that. Not with protests or petitions, but with action. Real, tangible action. At 16, she caught the attention of a man named Agent Daniel Harris. He had been sent to recruit her for a special program, a joint initiative between the CIA and a handful of elite universities. They were looking for young, brilliant minds who could think outside the box. Jasmine fit the bill perfectly. "You're exactly what we need," Harris had told her during their first meeting. "But this isn't just about coding or hacking. It's about making a difference. Are you ready for that?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. Yes. By 17, she was officially a CIA operative. Her training was intense, hand-to-hand combat, cryptography, undercover tactics. But it was her ability to blend in, to become whoever she needed to be, that set her apart. She was a chameleon, slipping into roles with ease. And when the agency needed someone to infiltrate a human trafficking ring operating out of her city, Jasmine was the obvious choice. The mission was simple: gather evidence, identify the key players, and bring them down. But it was dangerous. The ring was run by a man known only as the Broker, a shadowy figure who had evaded law enforcement for years. Jasmine went undercover as a vulnerable teenager, using her age and appearance to gain their trust. For months, she played the part perfectly, gathering intel and sending it back to her handlers. But then, everything went wrong. The night of her arrest started like any other. Jasmine had just left a meeting with one of the Broker's lieutenants, her backpack stuffed with incriminating documents. She was walking home, her mind racing with plans to transmit the data to her handlers, when the police car screeched to a halt beside her. "Hands where we can see them," an officer shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. Jasmine froze, her heart pounding. She knew better than to resist. She raised her hands slowly, her mind racing. This wasn't part of the plan. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "You're under arrest for grand theft auto, resisting arrest, and assaulting an officer," the officer said, his tone cold. He grabbed her arms, twisting them behind her back with a force that made her wince. Jasmine's mind raced. This wasn't right. She hadn't stolen a car. She hadn't assaulted anyone. But as they shoved her into the back of the squad car, she realized the truth. She had been set up. At the station, the evidence against her was overwhelming. Security footage showed a figure matching her description fleeing the scene of a stolen car. Fingerprints lifted from the vehicle matched hers. Witnesses, paid off or coerced, testified that she had been the one behind the wheel. Jasmine's lawyer, Marcus Reed, was a young public defender with a reputation for taking on impossible cases. He believed in her innocence, but even he was overwhelmed by the stacked evidence. "This doesn't make sense," Marcus said during their first meeting, his brow furrowed as he flipped through the case file. "The timeline's off. The witnesses' stories don't add up. But the evidence—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "It's airtight." Jasmine leaned forward, her voice low. "It's not. It's fabricated. I was set up." Marcus looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "By who?" Jasmine hesitated. She couldn't reveal her mission, not yet. "I can't say," she said finally. "But I need you to trust me." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Jasmine, I want to help you. But without more to go on, this is going to be an uphill battle." Jasmine nodded, her jaw tightening. She knew the risks. If she revealed her CIA badge, it could blow her cover and jeopardize the entire mission. But if she didn't, she could spend the rest of her life in prison. As the days turned into weeks, Jasmine prepared for her trial. She studied the case file, memorized every detail, and rehearsed her testimony. But she kept her CIA badge hidden, tucked safely in the lining of her blazer. She would reveal it when the time was right, and not a moment sooner. The night before the trial, Jasmine sat in her cell, her mind racing. She thought about her mother, who had worked 3 jobs to give her a better life. She thought about the victims of the trafficking ring, still trapped and waiting for someone to save them. And she thought about herself, not as a victim, but as a fighter. She wasn't going down without a fight. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens poised and cameras ready. The gallery buzzed with whispers, everyone eager to see how the trial of the so-called teen car thief would unfold. At the defense table, Jasmine sat quietly, her hands clasped in her lap, her face a mask of calm. Beside her, Marcus Reed shuffled through his notes, his brow furrowed with concentration. The prosecution's case was relentless. One by one, officers took the stand, their testimonies painting Jasmine as a dangerous criminal. "She was behind the wheel of the stolen vehicle," Officer Daniels testified, his voice steady, but his eyes avoiding Jasmine's. "When we attempted to apprehend her, she became violent, striking Officer Martinez and attempting to flee." The prosecutor, a slick man in his 40s named Gregory Hargrove, nodded solemnly. "And the security footage?" he asked, gesturing to the screen at the front of the room. The video played, showing a figure in a hoodie fleeing the scene of a stolen car. The figure's face was obscured, but the height and build matched Jasmine's. The prosecutor paused the video, zooming in on a blurry image of the suspect's hand. "As you can see," he said, "the suspect's fingerprints match those of the defendant." Jasmine's jaw tightened. She knew the footage was doctored, the fingerprints planted. But without hard evidence to prove it, the lies were being accepted as facts. Marcus did his best to counter the prosecution's case. During cross-examination, he grilled Officer Daniels about the timeline of events. "You claim the defendant was driving the stolen vehicle at 9:15 p.m., Marcus said, his tone sharp. "But according to your own report, the vehicle was reported stolen at 9:30 p.m. How do you explain that?" Officer Daniels hesitated, his eyes darting to the prosecutor. "It must have been a typo," he said finally. "A typo?" Marcus repeated, his voice rising. "Or a lie?" The courtroom erupted into murmurs, and Judge Hayes slammed her gavel. "Order!" she barked, her gaze shifting to Marcus. "Counselor, watch your tone." Marcus nodded, but the damage was done. The inconsistency in the timeline planted a seed of doubt in the jury's minds. But it wasn't enough to dismantle the prosecution's case. As the trial dragged on, Jasmine's frustration grew. She watched as lies were presented as facts, as her character was assassinated without consequence. She wanted to scream, to stand up and reveal the truth, but she couldn't. Not yet. When Jasmine took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. All eyes were on her as she raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. She sat tall, her posture confident, her voice steady as Marcus began his questioning. "Ms. Carter," Marcus said, his tone gentle, "can you tell the court where you were on the night of the alleged crime?" Jasmine nodded. "I was walking home from the library," she said. "I had been studying for my exams." "And did you steal a car that night?" Marcus asked. "No," Jasmine said firmly. "I didn't." Marcus nodded, glancing at the jury. "The prosecution has presented evidence suggesting otherwise. Security footage, fingerprints, witness testimonies. How do you explain that?" Jasmine hesitated, her eyes flicking to the gallery. She knew this was her moment, but she had to tread carefully. "I can't explain it," she said finally. But I can tell you this. I was set up. The courtroom erupted into whispers, and Judge Hayes slammed her gavel. Order! She barked, her gaze shifting to Jasmine. Ms. Carter, please elaborate. Jasmine took a deep breath. I can't go into details, she said, her voice steady. But I was working on something important. Something that made certain people very nervous. This trial isn't about me. It's about silencing me. The prosecutor, Gregory Hargrove, was on his feet in an instant. Objection, Your Honor, he said, his voice sharp. The defendant is making baseless accusations. Sustained, Judge Hayes said, her gaze shifting to Jasmine. Ms. Carter, stick to the facts. Jasmine nodded, but her eyes burned with determination. She had planted the seed. Now, it was up to the jury to decide if they believed her. When it was Hargrove's turn to cross-examine, he didn't hold back. Ms. Carter, he began, his tone dripping with sarcasm. You claim you were set up. Can you provide any evidence to support that claim? Not at this time, Jasmine said, her voice calm. Hargrove smirked. Convenient. And this important work you mentioned. Can you tell us what that was? Jasmine hesitated. I can't, she said finally. It's classified. Hargrove's smirk widened. Classified? You're 18 years old. What could you possibly be involved in that's classified? The courtroom erupted into laughter, and Jasmine's cheeks burned. But she didn't back down. I can't say, she repeated, her voice steady. But I'm telling the truth. Hargrove leaned in, his voice low. Or maybe, you're just making excuses. Jasmine's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She knew the truth. And soon, so would everyone else. During a recess, Jasmine sat in a small holding room, her mind racing. She had done her best to plant doubt in the jury's minds. But it wasn't enough. The prosecution's case was too strong, the lies too convincing. She needed to do something drastic. As she waited, she overheard a conversation outside the door. Two officers, the same ones who had testified against her, were talking in low voices. We need to make sure she doesn't get a chance to talk, one of them said. If she reveals what she knows, we're all screwed. Don't worry, the other replied. We've got people on the inside. She won't make it through the night. Jasmine's blood ran cold. She had known the risks, but hearing the threat out loud made it real. They weren't just trying to silence her in court. They were trying to silence her permanently. She clenched her fists, her mind racing. She couldn't wait for the system to work. She had to take matters into her own hands. When the trial resumed, Jasmine stood before the judge, her heart pounding, but her face calm. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady. I have something to show the court. The judge raised an eyebrow. Proceed. Jasmine reached into her blazer and pulled out her CIA badge, holding it up for the room to see. The gold emblem gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the room erupted into chaos. Order! Judge Hayes shouted, slamming her gavel, but the damage was done. Every eye in the courtroom was fixed on the badge in Jasmine's hand. Miss Carter, the judge said slowly, her voice uncharacteristically soft. Would you care to explain? Jasmine took a deep breath. Your Honor, I'm a covert operative for the Central Intelligence Agency. I was undercover, investigating a human trafficking ring operating in this city. The men who arrested me weren't real officers. They were part of the ring. They planted the evidence, staged the footage, and tried to silence me. The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. The prosecutor stammered, This is highly irregular. Irregular? Jasmine interrupted, her voice sharp. What's irregular is that I had to sit here and listen to lies while the real criminals are still out there. What's irregular is that no one bothered to question why an 18-year-old girl would be accused of these crimes in the first place. Judge Hayes leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Bailiff, she said after a long pause, escort Miss Carter to my chambers. This court is adjourned. As Jasmine was led away, the courtroom erupted into whispers. The game had changed, and Jasmine was ready to play. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on Jasmine as she stood before the judge. She reached into her blazer, her movements deliberate, and pulled out a small metallic badge. The gold emblem gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the room erupted into chaos. Order! Judge Hayes shouted, slamming her gavel. But the damage was done. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, their cameras flashing as they shouted questions. The gallery buzzed with whispers, the tension in the room palpable. Jasmine held the badge high, her voice steady but firm. Your Honor, I'm a covert operative for the Central Intelligence Agency. This trial isn't about me. It's about exposing a human trafficking ring operating in this city. The prosecutor, Gregory Hargrove, was on his feet in an instant. "Objection, Your Honor!" he shouted, his face red with anger. "This is highly irregular." Judge Hayes raised a hand, silencing him. "Overruled," she said, her gaze shifting to Jasmine. "Ms. Carter, you have the floor." Jasmine took a deep breath, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. She had waited for this moment, planned for it. Now, it was time to reveal the truth. "For the past 6 months," Jasmine began, her voice clear and strong, "I've been working undercover to infiltrate a human trafficking ring run by a man known only as the Broker. This ring has been operating in this city for years, preying on vulnerable women and children. My mission was to gather evidence, identify the key players, and bring them to justice." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "But the ring isn't just made up of criminals. It's protected by corrupt officers, men who are supposed to uphold the law, but instead use it to shield themselves. When I got too close, they framed me. They planted evidence, staged footage, and paid off witnesses to silence me." The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Jasmine continued, her voice rising with passion. "The officers who arrested me, Officers Daniels and Martinez, are part of the ring. They're the ones who staged my arrest, who lied on the stand, who tried to destroy my life to protect their own." She turned to the judge, her eyes burning with determination. "Your Honor, I have evidence. Names, locations, transactions, everything you need to bring them down. But I need your help." Judge Hayes leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Carter," she said after a long pause, "this is a serious accusation. Do you understand the consequences if you're lying?" Jasmine didn't flinch. "I'm not lying," she said firmly, "and I'm willing to prove it." The judge nodded, her gaze shifting to the prosecutor. "Mr. Hargrove, I'm calling a recess. We need to review this new evidence." As the judge rose from her seat, the courtroom erupted into murmurs. Reporters scrambled to file their stories, their headlines already taking shape. "Teen CIA operative exposes human trafficking ring in shocking courtroom revelation." The fallout was swift. Within hours, Officers Daniels and Martinez were arrested, their badges confiscated as they were led away in handcuffs. The evidence Jasmine provided led to a series of raids, dismantling the trafficking ring and rescuing dozens of victims. Jasmine was hailed as a hero. Her face splashed across every news outlet. But she didn't bask in the attention. She had a mission to complete. As she stood outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras, Jasmine's mind was already racing. The Broker was still out there, and she wasn't about to let him slip away. "Ms. Carter!" a reporter shouted, shoving a microphone in her face. "How does it feel to be a hero?" Jasmine smiled faintly. "I'm not a hero," she said, her voice steady. "I'm just someone who saw something wrong and decided to do something about it." As she walked away, her phone buzzed with a message from her handler. Mission accomplished. But there's more work to do. Jasmine tucked her phone into her pocket, her eyes scanning the horizon. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. The city lights shimmered like stars as Jasmine stood on the rooftop, the cool night breeze brushing against her face. Below her, the streets buzzed with life, cars honking, people laughing, the hum of a city that never slept. But for Jasmine, the noise felt distant, almost muted. She had spent months in the shadows, fighting a battle most people would never see. And now, as she looked out at the skyline, she allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. The trafficking ring was dismantled. The Broker was behind bars, his empire in ruins. Dozens of victims had been rescued, their lives given a second chance. Jasmine's name had been cleared, her innocence proven beyond a doubt. But for her, the fight wasn't over. It never was. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, glancing at the message from her handler. "New mission. Ready when you are." Jasmine smiled faintly, tucking the phone away. She had known this moment would come. The CIA didn't recruit her for one mission. They recruited her for a lifetime of them, and she was ready. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught a flicker of movement below. A young girl, no older than 10, stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the sky. For a moment their eyes met, and Jasmine felt a pang of something. Hope, maybe, or determination. That girl would never know the battles Jasmine had fought, the sacrifices she had made. But because of those battles, that girl could dream without fear. Jasmine took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She had made a difference, and she would keep making a difference, one mission at a time. As she disappeared into the night, her final thought echoed like a promise. Sometimes the quietest voices speak the loudest truths.